The rain didn't fall. It was driven against the windshield of my sedan like handfuls of gravel thrown by an angry god. I sat in the darkness of the Lincoln, the engine idling with a low, vibrating hum that traveled up through the leather seat and settled into the base of my spine. It was a cold day in November, the kind of gray, sunless afternoon that makes the city look like a black and white photograph of something that used to be beautiful. I am Arthur Sterling. I am 79 years old. My hands, resting on the steering wheel, are spotted with age and scarred from a lifetime of labor, first with a shovel, then with a handshake, and finally with the stroke of a pen. I built that tower. I poured the foundation when the banks laughed at me. I negotiated the steel contracts when the unions tried to bleed me dry. I breathed life into that concrete skeleton until it became the beating heart of this city's financial district. But today, sitting in the shadows of the street level, I felt less like the architect of an empire and more like a ghost haunting his own graveyard. I was watching the revolving doors. I was watching for him. Daniel, my son, my only child, the boy I had carried on my shoulders at the groundbreaking ceremony 30 years ago. He was taking over as CEO next week. The papers were drawn up, sitting in a velvet folder on my desk in the penthouse office. The transfer was imminent. I called it a terrifying gamble. For months, a cold knot of dread had been tightening in my stomach, a physical weight that sat just below my ribs. It wasn't the fear of letting go. I was tired. I was ready to rest. It was the fear of who I was letting go to. I had seen the small things, the way he spoke to the waitstaff at our weekly lunches, snapping his fingers for water without looking them in the eye, the way he stepped over puddles while his assistant scrambled to keep his Italian loafers dry, the way he laughed at jokes that weren't funny because the person telling them was rich, and ignored the wisdom of men who were poor. I needed to know. I needed to know if the man inheriting my life's work had a soul, or if I had raised a wolf in bespoke clothing. I clutched the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I reached into the deep pocket of my trench coat. My fingers brushed against the lining, seeking the familiar bulk of my wallet. It was gone, but I hadn't lost it. I had given it away.
It was an old, battered piece of leather, cracked at the spine, shaped by the curve of my hip over 20 years. Inside, it held $500 in cash, crisp, new hundreds. But the money didn't matter. What mattered was the photograph tucked behind the plastic window. It was a picture of Sarah, my late wife, taken on our honeymoon in 1968. She was laughing, her hair blown across her face by the wind, her eyes bright with a promise that we would build a good life. I had given that wallet to Elias at 7 a.m. this morning. Elias, to the pedestrians rushing past on the sidewalk, Elias was just debris. He was a lump of dirty coats and cardboard sleeping on the heating grate 3 blocks down. To me, he was Corporal Elias Thorne, 1st Infantry Division. We had crawled through the mud together in the Mekong Delta. We had shared cigarettes while mortar rounds walked toward our foxhole. He had lost his way when we came back. The noise of the war never really stopped for him. I had gotten lucky. I supported him silently, cash and a handshake, a warm coat in winter, but he refused charity. He had pride. "Just do this one thing for me, Elias," I had told him this morning, pressing the wallet into his crime-stained hands. "Wait for Daniel. Watch for him to leave the building. Walk up to him. Hand him the wallet. Tell him you found it on the sidewalk. Tell him it belongs to Mr." Elias had asked, his voice rasping from decades of rough living. It was a simple test, a test of character, a test of basic human decency. Would he thank the man? Would he offer a reward? Would he look a fellow human being in the eye and acknowledge his existence? Or would he reveal the rot I suspected was growing in his heart? I checked my watch. 4:15 p.m. Daniel always left early on Fridays. He had a standing reservation at the club. The revolving doors spun. There he was. Daniel stepped out onto the wet pavement. He was flanked by 2 junior associates, young men who mirrored his stride, desperate to absorb his power by osmosis. Daniel looked immaculate. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my father made in a lifetime. His hair was perfect. He walked with the arrogant chin-up stride of a man who believes he has already won the race, unaware that he was born on the finish line. I held my breath. The air in the car felt thin. "Come on, Elias," I whispered to the glass. Elias appeared from the side of the building. He was shivering.
The rain had soaked through his layers of mismatched flannel. He shuffled forward, his posture hunched, clutching my wallet in both hands like a holy relic. He looked small next to the towering glass facade. He looked breakable. I watched Daniel stop to check his phone. The associate stopped with him, holding umbrellas over his head, ensuring not a single drop of rain touched the air apparent. Elias stepped into the circle of dry pavement. I couldn't hear the words through the sealed windows of the Lincoln and the drumming of the rain, but I saw the moment happen in slow motion. Elias reached out. He held the wallet forward. He was speaking. I knew what he was saying. "Mr. Sterling, I found this." Daniel looked up from his phone. He looked at the wallet. Then he looked at Elias. I leaned forward, my forehead resting against the cold steering wheel. "Please, Daniel, just say thank you. Just show a flicker of kindness. Prove me wrong. Prove that I didn't fail you. If you are listening to this and you think blood is thicker than water, remember that blood can also be poisonous. I wish someone had warned me that you can give a child the world, the best schools, the easiest path, and they will still complain about the view. I wish someone had told me that character isn't inherited, it's forged, and I had shielded my son from the very fire that would have made him a man. I watched my legacy shatter in real time. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't reach out with gratitude. He recoiled. He jumped back as if Elias were a carrier of the plague, his face twisted into a sneer of absolute disgust. He shouted something. I saw his mouth move. "Get away." Elias rose. He looked confused. He took a step forward, trying to explain, trying to shove the wallet toward Daniel to show him it was safe. Daniel swung his arm. It was a violent, backhanded motion. He slapped the wallet out of Elias's hand. The leather smacked onto the wet pavement. It landed in a muddy, oil-slicked puddle near the curb. My heart stopped. The image of Sarah, face down in the gutter. Elias didn't get angry. He didn't shout back. He bent down. He dropped to his knees on the wet concrete, his old joints stiff. He picked up the wallet. He tried to wipe the mud off on his sleeve. He looked up at Daniel, his eyes pleading. He held it out again. And then Daniel did the thing that killed the father in me and woke up the CEO. He kicked it.
He drew back his polished leather boot and kicked the wallet out of Elias's hand. But his aim was careless, or perhaps malicious. The toe of his boot connected with Elias's wrist. Elias fell back, landing hard on his hip in the standing water. He clutched his hand to his chest, curling into a ball of misery. Daniel laughed. I saw his head throw back. I saw the associates laugh with him, a cruel, sharp sound that I imagined cutting through the rain like a serrated knife. Then Daniel walked over to where the wallet had skidded. He picked it up with 2 fingers, pinching the corner as if it were radioactive. He opened it. He didn't look at the ID. He didn't look at the picture of his mother. He pulled out the cash, $500. He stuffed the bills into his own pocket. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed the empty wallet back into the gutter, right next to the man who had tried to help him. He turned to his associates. One of them handed him a sanitizer wipe. I watched my son wipe his hands. He scrubbed his fingers, his palms, the back of his hands, erasing the contact, erasing the contamination of poverty. He threw the wipe on the ground. He walked to his Porsche, got in, and drove away. I sat in the car, paralyzed. The grief was not sharp, it was heavy, suffocating, like a blanket of wet wool wrapped around my face. I couldn't breathe. I felt the tears pricking my eyes, hot, angry tears. I wasn't crying for the wallet. I wasn't crying for the money. I was crying for the little boy in the Superman pajamas who used to ask me to check under the bed for monsters. I realized with a clarity that broke my heart into jagged shards that I hadn't raised a son. I had raised a parasite, a creature that fed on the host and despised it for bleeding. I sat there for 5 minutes. I waited until the taillights of his Porsche disappeared into the city traffic. Then I opened the car door. I stepped out into the rain. I wasn't wearing my hat.
The water soaked my silver hair instantly. It ran down my neck, cold and shocking. My Italian leather shoes stepped into the deep puddle by the curb, the cold water seeping into my socks. I didn't care. I walked over to the grate. Elias was sitting up, rocking back and forth, nursing his bruised hand. He was muddy, wet, and shivering violently. "Elias," I said softly. He looked up. His eyes were wide, filled with a terrible shame. He recognized me. "Arthur," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry,"
I asked, kneeling down beside him in the filth. "I tried," he stammered, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. He said I stole it. He said I was a thief. He took the money, Arthur. He took your money." "Keep the money," I said, my voice trembling with a rage I was struggling to contain. "He thinks he took $500. I reached into the gutter. My hand closed around the muddy leather of the wallet. I pulled it out. I opened it. The plastic window was cracked. Mud had seeped inside. The picture of Sarah was soaked. A smear of grit covered her smile. I wiped it gently with my thumb. "I promised her," I whispered to the rain. But taking care of him now didn't mean giving him the keys to the kingdom. It meant stopping him before he destroyed everything we'd built. It meant teaching him the lesson I should have taught him 20 years ago. "Arthur, your coat," Elias said, looking at my trench coat trailing in the oil slick. "It's just wool, Elias," I said. "It can be replaced." I stood up, my knees popping. I reached down and offered my hand to the man on the ground. "Come on," I said. Elias hesitated. "Where?" "I can't go in your car, Arthur." "You are my brother," I said fiercely, "and you are the only honest man I have seen all day." I helped him up. He was light, too light. He leaned on me, and we walked together to the Lincoln. I opened the passenger door. I helped him in. I didn't care about the upholstery. I didn't care about the smell. I walked around to the driver's side and got in. I cranked the heat up to high. The vents blasted hot air, filling the cabin. Elias sat there, holding his wrist, staring at the dashboard. "We're going to get you a hot meal," I said, putting the car in gear. "A steak, and a doctor for that hand, and then a hotel room." Elias asked, looking at me sideways. "What about Daniel? He's—" I looked up at the skyscraper. The lights were on in the penthouse. Daniel's office. He was probably there now, or on his way to his club, laughing about the homeless man he had kicked. He thought he was inheriting a kingdom. He thought the world belonged to him by right of blood. He didn't know he had just signed his abdication. "No," I said, my voice dropping to a register of cold steel that I hadn't used since the boardrooms of the 1980s. I placed the muddy wallet on the dashboard. It sat there, ugly and ruined, a monument to the son I had lost, and the war I was about to start.
"Tomorrow is the board meeting," I said, staring at the tower one last time before pulling into traffic. "Daniel is expecting a coronation." I drove away into the rain, the windshield wipers slicing back and forth like a metronome counting down the hours of my son's career. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. Elias asked quietly. "I will be," I said. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Elias, I want you there." "Me?" Elias looked terrified. "I am looking at you," I said. "And tomorrow, Daniel is going to look at you too." A boardroom smells different than a battlefield, but the casualty rate is often the same. It smells of stale coffee, furniture polish, and the metallic tang of fear masked by expensive cologne. I stood outside the double mahogany doors of the Sterling & Son executive suite, my hand hovering over the brass handle. Inside that room, my life's work was waiting to be signed away. Inside that room, 20 of the most powerful investors in the state were waiting to crown a new king. And inside that room, my son was sitting in a chair he believed he was born to occupy, unaware that the floor beneath him was actually a trapdoor. I took a deep breath, inhaling the conditioned air of the skyscraper I had built. I adjusted the grip on my cane. I didn't need it, not really. My knees were stiff, yes, and my back ached when it rained, but I could still walk with the upright cadence of an infantryman. Today, however, the cane was a prop. It was part of the costume. I needed to be the old lion, tired, toothless, ready to sleep in the sun. I pushed the doors open. The conversation inside died instantly. The room was a fortress of glass and dark wood, floating 60 stories above the city. The view was breathtaking, a panorama of steel and clouds, but no one was looking out the windows. They were all looking at Daniel. He was sitting at the head of the table, my seat. He looked every inch the CEO. His suit was tailored to a millimeter of perfection. His hair was swept back, gleaming under the recessed lighting. He was spinning a gold fountain pen, my gold fountain pen, I noted with a pang of irritation, between his fingers with a practiced, nonchalant rhythm. He looked immaculate. He looked victorious. He looked up as I entered, and for a split second I saw the annoyance flash in his eyes. He checked his watch. He was thinking, "Hurry up, old man. Get out of the way."
"Father," Daniel said, standing up. He smoothed his tie, plastering on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We were just reviewing the final transfer documents. You're just in time to sign." "I'm sure they are," I said. My voice was soft, slightly breathy. I shuffled forward, emphasizing the click-drag rhythm of the cane on the parquet floor. "Here, take your seat," Daniel said, gesturing to the chair next to him. Not the head of the table, the side. He had already displaced me physically. The paperwork was just a formality. "Sit down, Daniel," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't snap. But there was a frequency in my voice, a resonant baritone that cut through the ambient noise of the room like a submarine ping. It was a tone I hadn't used in 10 years, not since the hostile takeover of '95. Daniel paused. The smile faltered. The board members, men and women I had made rich, people who had known me for decades, shifted in their leather chairs. They sensed the change in barometric pressure. "We really need to get the ink dry." I turned to face them. I leaned on my cane with both hands, staring down the long table. "We are an investment firm," I continued. "We spend our days judging value. We look at a company and we ask, what are its assets? What are its liabilities?" Arthur, one of the board members, a man named George, cleared his throat. "We've done the due diligence. The transition plan is solid." I asked. I looked at Daniel. He was still standing, his hand gripping the back of my chair. He looked impatient. He looked bored. "Dad, save the philosophy for the toast tonight," Daniel said, checking his watch again. "The market closes in an hour." "I lost my wallet yesterday," I said. The non sequitur hung in the air. Daniel rolled his eyes. I saw him mouth the word dementia to the CFO sitting to his right. "It was an old thing," I went on, my eyes locked on my son's face. "Leather, falling apart. It had $500 in cash inside, and a picture of your mother." Daniel froze. I saw the recognition hit him like a physical slap. His eyes darted to the side, then back to me. He knew exactly the wallet I was describing. He had held it in his hand 24 hours ago. He had wiped the mud off it before stealing the cash. But he stayed silent. I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. He was gambling. He was betting that I had simply lost it, that I didn't know how I lost it.
He was betting that the bum he had kicked in the street was invisible, voiceless, and unconnected to me. "A man found it," I said. "A man with nothing. A homeless veteran who sleeps on a grate 3 blocks from this building. He could have kept it. He could have thrown it away. Instead, he tried to return it to—" "That's great, Dad," Daniel said. His voice was a little too loud. He was sweating now. A thin sheen of moisture appeared on his upper lip. "Good Samaritan. Wonderful. We can send him a reward." I asked. "Yes, of course," Daniel stammered. "It proves people are good." "You didn't answer the question, Daniel," I said. "I said he tried to return it to a representative of this company." The room went deadly quiet. The air conditioning hummed, sounding like a jet engine in the silence. "I don't know what you're talking about," Daniel lied. He sat down, trying to regain his composure, spinning the pen faster. I reached into the pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a small, silver USB drive. I held it up. It caught the light from the chandelier. "I have dashcam footage from yesterday, Daniel," I said calmly. "From the black sedan parked directly across the street from the entrance. The one with the tinted windows." Daniel's face drained of color. He looked like a wax figure melting under heat. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I turned and plugged the drive into the presentation laptop connected to the wall screen. "Let's look at the assets and liabilities," I said. The massive screen behind me flickered to life. The video was grainy, shot through a rain-streaked windshield, but the image was undeniable. It showed the entrance of Sterling & Son. It showed Daniel walking out in his expensive suit. It showed Elias shuffling forward, humble, holding the wallet out like an offering. The boardroom erupted in gasps. "Oh my God," a female board member whispered, her hand covering her mouth. On the screen, Daniel recoiled. The video had no sound, which somehow made the violence worse. We watched Daniel slap the wallet out of the old man's hand. We saw it splash into the puddle. "This," Daniel shouted, jumping up from his chair. "Turn it off. That bum was aggressive. He was accosting me," I roared. The command slammed into him. He collapsed back into the chair, trembling. On the screen, the cruelty played out. Elias kneeling in the mud. Elias trying to clean the wallet. Elias handing it back. And then the kick.
The boot connecting with the hand. The old man falling back into the gutter. A collective groan of disgust went through the room. These were hardened business people, sharks in their own right, but there is a line between ruthlessness and sadism. Daniel had just crossed it in 4K resolution. Then came the theft. Daniel picking up the wallet, taking the cash, throwing the empty shell back at the veteran, wiping his hands. I pulled the USB drive out. The screen went black. I looked at the board members. They were staring at Daniel with open revulsion. The CFO had pushed his chair away from Daniel, creating a physical distance between them. "That," I pointed a shaking finger at Daniel, "is the man you want to lead this company. A man who steals from the poor, a man who kicks the helpless." Daniel screamed, his voice cracking, high and desperate. "He was a thief. I was just taking back what was yours." "Open the doors," I commanded, speaking to the security guard standing by the entrance. The guard nodded and pushed the double doors wide open. Elias walked in. He wasn't wearing the dirty, mismatched flannel from yesterday. He was wearing a navy blue suit I had bought him this morning. He was clean-shaven. His hair was trimmed. He stood tall, his back straight, the posture of the soldier he once was returning to him. He walked with a slight limp, the hip Daniel had injured, but he moved with a dignity that filled the room. Daniel stared at him. His eyes bulged. He looked from Elias to me, the realization crashing down on him like a falling beam. Elias walked to the head of the table. He didn't look at the board members. He looked only at Daniel. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out $500, 5 crisp, new $100 bills. He placed them gently on the mahogany table in front of Daniel. "I didn't steal it," Elias said. His voice was raspy but clear. It carried to the back of the room. "And I didn't want your money." Daniel stared at the money. He looked up at Elias. He looked at me. He realized the trap had snapped shut, and he was the one bleeding. "You set me up," Daniel hisses, spittle flying from his lips. "You crazy old man, you set me up." "I gave you a test," I corrected him, my voice cold as the grave. I walked over to the table where the transfer documents sat in their velvet folder. The papers that would have given him everything, the papers that would have sealed my legacy. I picked them up.
"You think value is what you can take, Daniel," I said. I ripped the documents in half. The sound of the tearing paper was loud in the silent room. It sounded like a bone breaking. I ripped them again and again. I let the pieces flutter down onto the table, covering the money Elias had returned. "The company is not going to you, Daniel," I announced, turning to the board. "Effective immediately, I am dissolving the family trust." There was a stunned silence. Then George, the board member who had defended Daniel earlier, nodded slowly. "I second the motion," he said quietly. I put a hand on Elias's shoulder. He flinched slightly, not used to the touch, but he didn't pull away. "Elias here will be the honorary chairman of the board for the foundation," I said. Daniel's face turned a violent shade of purple. The veins in his neck stood out. The facade of the polished CEO crumbled, revealing the spoiled child underneath. "I built this quarter. I earned this. I sat in these meetings while you were out playing golf." "You earned nothing," I said. I stepped closer to him, invading his space, looking him dead in the eye. "You were born on third base and thought you hit a triple. You have never built a thing in your life, Daniel." I pointed to the door. Daniel laughed, a manic, hysterical sound. "You can't fire me." "Not anymore," I said. "Now, you're just a liability." I looked at the security guard. "Escort him out. If he resists, call the police and press charges for assault and theft." The guard stepped forward. He didn't look at Daniel with fear anymore. He looked at him with pity. He put a heavy hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Let's go, sir," the guard said. "Daniel!" shrieked. He looked around the room, looking for an ally, looking for anyone to save him. But the board members were looking at their phones, looking at the table, looking anywhere but at him. He was radioactive. "I'll sue you," Daniel screamed as the guard dragged him toward the door. "I'll declare you incompetent. You'll die alone, old man." I watched him go. I watched my son, my flesh and blood, being hauled out of the empire I built for him. It hurt. God, it hurt. It felt like a physical wound, like I was cutting off my own limb without anesthesia. I felt a tear track down my cheek, hot and stinging. But as the double doors swung shut, cutting off his screams, a profound silence returned to the room.
The air felt cleaner. I looked down at the table. I saw the torn papers. I saw the $500. And sitting there, untouched in the chaos, was the battered leather wallet. I picked it up. I opened it. The picture of Sarah was still there. She was still smiling. She was still looking at me with that promise in her eyes. I took care of him, Sarah, I thought. I stopped him from becoming a monster. It was the hardest thing I ever did, but I did it. I looked at Elias. He was standing there, looking uncomfortable in the suit, wringing his hands. "I'm sorry, Arthur," he whispered. "You didn't cause it, Elias," I said, patting his arm. I took a deep breath. I felt the weight in my chest lighten. The dread was gone. The fear of the future was gone. I had burned the bridge, but I was standing on the right side of the river. I looked at the board. They were watching me, waiting for a cue. I walked to the head of the table. I pulled out my chair, the chair Daniel had been keeping warm. I sat down. "What now?" I asked. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the crushing weight of my legacy. I felt peace. I had lost a son, but in the quiet, honest eyes of the veteran standing beside me, I knew I had regained my dignity.